Hello, everyone, and welcome to session 8 Carbon Cycle with Mrs. Gupta. This is the distance learning week of 525 to 531. In this lesson, the agenda for this is review this carbon cycle presentation, watch the video tutorial on the carbon cycle, complete and turn in two Google Form assignment by Sunday 531. Both the forms are all tasks. One of them is 7 points all tasks, the other one is 8 points all tasks. One of them is based on the reading, which is embedded in the form, and the other one is based on the interactive infographic, which is also attached to the Google form, and I'll be talking about that towards the end of this video presentation. As always, go to the Google Classroom and email me with questions or concerns and let me know how I can help you. There are a lot of words and vocabulary that are attached to this lesson. As you can see, they're all linked. So click on that word or the words and see the vocab and what does it mean. Basically, we'll be talking about the carbon and cycle and its movement in the 3 or 4 spheres and the biogeochemical cycles that are involved in the process of this carbon. The learning objective for this lesson are the climate change can occur when certain parts of the Earth systems are altered. Changes in the atmosphere due to human activity have increased the carbon dioxide concentrations and thus affect the climate. Gradual atmospheric changes were due to plants and other organisms that captured carbon dioxide and released oxygen. So, how much of carbon is there on the Earth? Carbon is an essential nutrient found in all the living things. The molecules that make up the living things are called as organic compound. Organic in chemistry is not free of pesticide. It means any compound that has carbon, the element, essential element, atomic number 6. If you remember the non-metal, the periodic table, so anything that has carbon will be categorized as an organic compound, like your glucose, your cellulose, your proteins, your DNA, your everything is made up of carbon. The carbon cycle describes how carbon moves through the 4 spheres and the fluctuations between the spheres. Each sphere contains a different amount of carbon stored in various factors known as the carbon reservoirs. So basically, going back, how much carbon is there on the Earth? The amount of carbon in the Earth is fixed. That because the law of conservation of mass, matter cannot be created nor destroyed. And most of this carbon is found in the geosphere, which is a great reservoir. 99% is there. But it also cycles in all the other spheres like hydrosphere, atmosphere, and biosphere and keeps on percentages there, they keeps on fluctuating. So biochemical cycles are the processes that transfer the carbon between the carbon reservoirs that I'm going to talk about those biogeochemical cycles very soon. But before we do that, let's know a couple of the units. The first one is the GTC, which is the gigatons of carbon, and 1 gigaton is equal to 1 billion tons. In billion, there are 690. So just imagine it's a very big number. GTC per year is the rate of carbon transfer in gigatons of carbon per year. Earth has 1.85 billion gigatons of carbon. So that means this is such a big number. You can see 15 zeros there. So that much of carbon is there in the Earth, and that is fixed. It can go from one sphere to the other, but like I mentioned earlier, because the law of conservation of mass, that amount of carbon, which is a huge amount, remains the same. And 99% is stored in the Earth crust within the geosphere. Not and out of the 99%, not all of that is cycled. Only some percentage is cycled, which I'm going to discuss soon. So let's talk about what are the carbon sinks and what are the carbon sources. Carbon sinks are the factors that remove more carbon from the atmosphere than they release. So if you see here, there are two major carbon sinks, the land sink and the ocean sink. In the land sink, what happens is the vegetation removes the carbon from the atmosphere and goes to the biosphere. And same thing happens in the ocean sink. The carbon is removed from the atmosphere and goes in the water. So these are the two major sinks, land sink and the ocean sink. Carbon reservoirs are the factors that store the carbon. So the lands, the vegetation, the hydrosphere, the ocean, and the geological reservoirs are some of the big carbon reservoirs. And the process of removing carbon from the atmosphere and storing it elsewhere is known as carbon sequestration. Carbon sources are the factors that release more carbon into the atmosphere than they remove. So basically, what is happening is between the carbon keeps on going back and forth from the carbon sink to the sources, and that is basically causing the entire carbon cycle. So our main goal as human is to keep more carbon in the sink than being releasing the carbon from the source to the atmosphere, so that less carbon will be there in the atmosphere, will less greenhouse effect, and the impact on the climate change will be also less. Temperature will um, not go up as it is going now up now. So look at the carbon reservoirs in the four spheres. So if you really look at that, the deep ocean one is the biggest reservoir, followed by the biosphere, then the atmosphere, then the surface ocean, and sediments are almost the same value. Now, I'll be talking about these reservoirs in detail one by one. So, carbon in the biosphere, that is the living things, carbon in the living sphere. The carbon in the biosphere is 550 gigatons of carbon. That is the less amount as compared to the other spheres. Carbon is stored in the in the biosphere in the form of biomass, which is the energy-rich organic compounds such as glucose. Um, all this that you find here on the left hand side are the organic compounds that are basically have carbon in them, like fatty acids, like triglycerides, and which make up your DNA, you make up your chloroplast, the nucleotide, the monosaccharide, the glucose, the chromosomes. All these guys, they have an essential element, carbon, and are the compound that make up these organisms. With the compounds with the carbon are called as the organic compounds. Most of the earth's biomass is found in the producers, such as the trees. So, if you remember your bio lesson from the ninth grade, the producers are the trees, which are the only ones that can trap the solar energy. And the major biomass, they at the bottom of the pyramid, exist in the producers. If you see this, like the diagram here, the plants are 450 here, and as you go up the pyramid, the biomass keeps on going down. So forests are the carbon sinks because the plants or the trees in the forest, they absorb the carbon and they store in them, that is the biosphere. So they are the huge sinks and they are very good for us. Respiration and photosynthesis cycles carbon in and out of the biosphere, and we'll talk about the respiration and photosynthesis and how they impact very soon. So let's talk about the carbon in the atmosphere. The carbon in the atmosphere exists in the form of the molecule, which is the carbon dioxide. Here is the carbon dioxide molecule. If you remember from the molecular shape lesson, it's a linear molecule with a 180-degree angle, CO2, one carbon and two oxygen. The carbon in the atmosphere is 800 gigatons of carbon, more than it is in the biosphere, and carbon is stored primarily as a carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is actually a greenhouse gas responsible for regulating temperature on the earth. Respiration and photosynthesis are biogenic carbon cycles within the atmosphere. What is biogenic? The biogenic is naturally controlled. They happen and the humans are basically not involved in that process. Anthropogenic carbon sources include land use change and the combustion. Anthropogenic carbon sources are A, biogenic carbon cycle which do not occur naturally and involve the humans. Carbon in the hydrosphere is total amount is 38,000 gigaton of carbon, and actually it is a huge amount. If you really look at it, uh, it comes from the surface ocean 1,000 and the deep ocean, which is 37,000 gigatons. Carbon is stored as the carbon dioxide, carbonic acid, bicarbonate, and the carbonate ion. If you remember the last lesson, the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere get absorbed by the ocean and goes in and make a form of carbonic acid, which makes the ocean acid. And this carbonic acid decomposes into carbonate and the bicarbonate ion. The carbonate ion combines with the calcium and is a very important chemical in the shells of the fish. Um, and air sea gas exchange cycles carbon in and out of the hydrosphere. So the world's oceans are a carbon sink, reducing the atmospheric carbon dioxide levels and hold 50 times more carbon than the atmosphere. So basically, what it means is that the ocean is our friend and is very important to keep the low levels of carbon in the atmosphere, as the carbon is going more in the ocean, in the hydrosphere, and ocean is acting as a huge carbon sink. So reducing the greenhouse gas in the atmosphere and helping in the maintaining the temperatures of the earth low and not trapping the solar radiation and not maintaining the temperatures going up and melting the i- ice caps and increasing the sea levels. Carbon in the geosphere. Um, Total carbon in the geosphere is um, 18,300 gigatons per year. So you might think that this number is less than that in the hydrosphere, but this is the number that is telling us that how much of carbon is cycled from the geosphere, not how much of the cycle is in the geosphere. That is much more than it is found in the hydrosphere. As I mentioned, 99% of the carbon is actually stored in the geosphere, but only 18,300 is cycled. Carbon is stored in the form of soil and sediments in the geosphere, rocks such as limestone, which is made up of calcium carbonate, and fossil fuels, which are coal, oil, and natural gas. Death and decomposition, sedimentation, and rock formation cycle the carbon in and out of the geosphere. So, how these fossil fuels are formed and how they go into the geosphere, for that, I have a small video for you here, which you can watch and understand more of the entering of the carbon in the geosphere. So, quick review of how the coal is formed. The before the dinosaurs, many giant plants they died in the swamps here. So you see the plants are dying here. Then over millions of years, the plants were buried under the water and the dirt, and the heat and the pressure turned the dead plants and mixed with the dirt into the coal. So basically, all this dirt, the dead plants, they got layered, and it took millions and millions of years to convert that in the coal by tons amount of heat and pressure. In the same way, we got the petroleum and the natural gas. So tiny sea plants and the animals died and were buried on the ocean floor. Over a period of time, they were covered by layers of silt and the sand. So here are the plant and the animal remains and the sand and the silt. Over the millions of years, the remains were buried deeper and deeper and got also layered by the sand and the silt. And the enormous heat and the pressure turned them into the oil and the gas. So today we drill down through these layers of the sand, silt, and the rocks to reach the rock formation that contain oil and gas deposits, which was once the living organisms, sea plants, and the animals. So this concludes the first part of the form, that is the carbon and the general form of the carbon cycle. Now we are going to talk to you about the second part, that is the biogeochemical cycles involved in this carbon cycle. So as you know, what is this word mean, the biogeochemical As you can see that it's a cycle. The cycling of the matter such as carbon, water, and nitrogen through biotic, that is living, and abiotic, that is non-living, like wind, water, within the phosphere is the biogeochemical cycle. Bio means living, geo means earth, and chemical means all the elements. This involves several processes, and those are photosynthesis, respiration, death and decomposition, sedimentation and rock formation, air sea gas exchange, land use change, fossil fuel combustion. So the first five of these guys, like the photosynthesis, respiration, death and decomposition, sedimentation and rock formation, air sea exchange, are all biogenic. What does biogenic mean? That are naturally occurring sources of carbon, so you don't need humans for them. The earth can take control of its own self, it can cycle on its own. And the last two, the land use change and the fossil fuel combustion, they are anthropogenic, means they are man-made sources. So whenever the humans intervened, we'll see what happened and what how are they fluctuating the level of the carbon within the cycles and what is the impact. So let's talk about these processes one by one. The first process is the photosynthesis. As you must be knowing from a biology class, photo means light and synthesis means making. So photosynthesis is the process by which the green plants, they take in carbon dioxide, and in the presence of water, which is grown from the ground, they make sugars and oxygen. So basically, they are producers. The trees are the producers, the plants, the green plants are the producers, and they're using photosynthesis to make their own food by removing the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and turning it into the sugar. And they are the only ones, the producers, that can trap the solar energy and make their own food. The rest of us, like be it like the animals, be it like deer, be it like lion, a lion of course doesn't eat trees, but like humans, all of us depend on the producers for our energy source. So like lion will depend on the deer, and the deer will depend on the grass. All of us ultimately depend on the producers for, because they are the only ones that can trap solar heat. Sugar is stored in the plants not only as a food source, but is used to make the various organic compounds, such as the cellulose, giving plant structure and rigidity. So, all the compounds that are organic compounds that make up the living things, like all the DNAs, the cellulose, the organelles, the glucose, all of them, um, it basically is important for, because they have carbon in them, they're all the organic compound. And it also, the sugar is not only used as a source, but is also used to make different types of organic compound within the living things. The organic molecules are rich in energy and are referred to as biomass, carbon stored in the biosphere. So now, because by the process of photosynthesis, the basically carbon is moving from the atmosphere to the biosphere. Carbon is being taken from the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide and is stored in the biosphere, whether it is like the plants or the other living things, as the biomass in the form of organic molecules. The next process is the respiration. It is just the opposite of photosynthesis. We all respire, all the living things, they do the cellular respiration. In that process, basically the glucose that is stored in the cells is broken down by oxygen to carbon dioxide and water vapor that are released in the atmosphere. So, as you see in the picture, all the living things are respiring, and they are releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So all the organisms in the biosphere, they consume sugar from their food and undergo cellular respiration to produce energy, releasing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in this process. So now in this process of respiration, the carbon has moved from the biosphere to the atmosphere. It is an essential process, and the carbon has to move from the biosphere to the atmosphere. We all know that we need energy to survive, and the energy is given to us by glucose, and the respiration has to happen. And in the process of respiration, the glucose is broken down in carbon dioxide, which is a byproduct that is released, and energy is produced, which is actually being used to do our daily works. The next process is the decomposition. We cannot talk about life if we don't talk about the death. They go hand in hand. Something that is live will be definitely going to be dead. So when organisms die, the other organism consume the remains and introduce their biomass into the geosphere. So humans eat chicken and produce feces. Bacteria and fungi, they consume the dead trees to produce humus, a key component of the soil. You must have heard of this word humus in horticulture. It is basically a rich nutrient of the soil. So basically, all what is happening is all the decomposition is happening of the plants and the animals, and they're either making the soil and the humus, which is a key component of the soil. So now the carbon is moving from the biosphere to the geosphere, from the living things to the earth. A small portion of the biomass is also converted into gases like methane, CH4, during the decomposition process, but that is very small, and we concentrate more on the carbon dioxide rather than concentrating carbon in the form of methane. The next process is the sedimentation and the rock formation. Weathering of rocks, that is the breaking down, and organic remains introduce carbon into the hydrosphere, breaking down into the sediments. So as the rocks are, they break, as you can see in the picture, they are breaking down, and they are going in the hydrosphere, and further they break down into the sediments, and sediments turn into the rocks over millions of years with heat and pressure. For example, calcium carbonate, the rich shellfish, they get broken down. Here you can see the process, the breaking down of the shell in the fish in the hydrosphere, turning into the sediments, and over the millions and millions of years, these sediments, they get mixed with the sand and the silt, and they get layered uh, in the form of the rock, which you can see here is the limestone, rich in calcium carbonate. So biomass from the vegetation buried over millions of years turn into rich energy fossil fuel, which is buried deep in the geosphere. So now the carbon has moved from the hydrosphere to the geosphere, from all the oceans to the earth. So let's talk about the process of air sea gas exchange. There are two processes involved in this phenomenon. They are dissolution and diffusion. Um, so the process of dissolution is when the atmospheric carbon dioxide dissolves into the hydrosphere. So the atmospheric carbon dioxide, like we discussed earlier, is dissolving in the water and making carbonic acid, lowering down the pH of the ocean, and this process is called as dissolution. On the other hand, the opposite process is also happening, which is called as a diffusion, where the carbon dioxide from the ocean gets into the atmosphere. And why does it get out from the ocean to the atmosphere? Because if the temperature of the ocean goes up, then the heat goes up, then the dissolved gases cannot stay dissolved in the hot things, and they get escaped to the carbon dioxide. So we do not like hot oceans, because that will be releasing more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere rather than keeping it within. So dissolution is from atmosphere to the hydrosphere, and diffusion is hydrosphere to the atmosphere. The rate of dissolution is definitely more than diffusion. So as CO2 level rise, more carbon dioxide enters the ocean, which will help reduce the effect of the climate change. Definitely, we need more dissolution to happen so that less carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere and more enters the ocean, and is the greenhouse gas is less in the atmosphere. So the reducing the effect of the climate change. Now that is the positive impact of the dissolution process. But as more and more carbon dioxide goes into the hydrosphere, there's a negative impact too. As you remember, we talked about the pH and the acidification. The ocean gets getting acidified as carbon dioxide get dissolved in the water, in the ocean. The carbonic acid is formed, and this carbonic acid lowers the pH of the ocean, making more ocean acidification happening and negatively impacting the marine organism, destroying the shells of the fish and destroying the marine life. Now, all these processes that I had discussed earlier are all biogenic and they keep on happening naturally. Now, the two processes that are not biogenic, that are man made and are one of them is the land use change that I'm going to talk about now. um, Land use change such as deforestation and the forest burning are both anthropogenic, that is means the man processes that remove the vegetation and releases the carbon into the atmosphere. So as we are going towards urbanization, we need more land. As a result, what is happening? We are doing cutting the trees, the deforestation is happening. We are making more malls, we are making more colonies, more townships, more um, killing the trees and destroying a forest. So as a result, what is happening is the carbon is moving from the biosphere, that is from the trees, to the atmosphere, back to the atmosphere. So think about it. Is it good for the deforestation, that more cutting the trees? What is the impact? What is going to happen if the more carbon is going in the atmosphere? This is a watch a CNN clip to learn more about it. How is the deforestation impacting the carbon and going from biosphere to atmosphere? The next process is combustion. You must have heard this word in the chemical reaction. The combustion is the process of burning a hydrocarbon in oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and water. The products are always carbon dioxide and water whenever the hydrocarbon is burned. But along with that, it gives a lot of energy, which is used to run your engines of the car and other stuff. Where is this hydrocarbon coming from? This is coming from the fossil fuels which we are digging. Now, since the late 1800s, when the Industrial Revolution started, humans have harvested fossil fuels from the geosphere to produce the energy via combustion, a process that releasing the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And as the increase of the energy, the global increase has increased globally, the energy increase. So we need to harvest more and more of fossil fuels um, and turn them into the from the geosphere to basically converting it into the carbon dioxide and the water. So if you remember, I talked to you about that the making the carbon going from the atmosphere to the geosphere and turning into the fossil fuel take millions and millions of years and a lot of heat and the pressure. But digging it and making the fossil fuels and burning them is doesn't take that much time. So as global energy consumption is rising up, we are at the risk of depleting these non-renewable energy sources since we are using the fossil fuels faster than we can form. So we should also look for a couple of things for to save our environment. Number one is not to burn these fossil fuels, to keep the carbon back in the fossil fuel, not into the atmosphere. That will have a that save climate change. And also it'll we have to find the alternative sources of energy like wind, like solar panels and electricity, like Tesla cars and all those that will not require the burning of the fossil fuel. So now the carbon is going from the geosphere, the fossil fuels where it is found, to the atmosphere. So look at the anthropogenic impact on the carbon cycle. The basically the human has intervened and is messing up and continuously messing up the carbon cycle. Look at this graph, and it is basically going up. The growth is large and it is uncertain. And to understand more about the gas problem, we can watch this video, the gas problem, and from NASA, and see how it is impacting our carbon cycle and overall climate change. Now, let me talk to you about carbon neutrality. Carbon neutrality is no net change in the atmospheric carbon. That means the carbon that is taken out from the atmosphere, the same amount of carbon is introduced to the atmosphere. But that actually is not happening. So, carbon negative means the removal of the carbon from the atmosphere is more than the uh, addition of the carbon to the atmosphere. So, plants are removing the carbon from the atmosphere and storing it from the atmosphere to the as a biomass in the carbon, which is what we do not need the carbon in the atmosphere. We need it either in the biomass or we need it in the geosphere. And the carbon positive is adding the carbon to the atmosphere by burning the fossil fuels. So when we are burning the fossil fuel, the we are basically releasing more carbon in the form of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. If we can keep this carbon negative and the positive both the ratio the same, then the carbon neutrality will be there. But actually, what is happening is, on the other hand, is we are digging in more of the fossil fuels. We are burning them, introducing more carbon to the atmosphere, doing deforestation, cutting the trees, and basically carbon negativity is getting lesser and lesser and lesser, impacting the climate change. So, if you really look at this picture that is telling you about the global carbon cycle, in the hydrosphere in the ocean, look at the arrow that is going, the carbon going up from the ocean to the air is 332, and the carbon coming back from the atmosphere to the ocean is 338. More carbon is coming back from the atmosphere to the ocean, a little bit more, and same thing is happening from the air to the vegetation. So carbon coming going from the land vegetation to the air is 439, but coming from the atmosphere to the vegetation back is actually more, 450, a little bit more. But look at this, the fossil fuel burning. Only I'm seeing one arrow going up, that is the carbon going from the fossil fuel to the atmosphere, and there is no counter arrow that is going for the carbon going from the atmosphere back to the geosphere or the fossil fuel. So the carbon cycle takeaways are: the carbon is cycled through the four spheres via naturally occurring biogeochemical processes. The majority of the carbon on the earth is stored in the geosphere via the rock and the fossil fuel formations. These processes take millions and millions of years. Forests and oceans are valuable carbon sinks, removing the atmospheric carbon dioxide. The biogenic carbon cycle is carbon neutral, keeping the carbon concentration in each sphere relatively stable. And anthropogenic factors, that are the man-made factors, are introducing more carbon into the atmosphere and disrupting the carbon cycle, resulting in rising atmospheric CO2 level, having a negative impact on the climate change. So these are the resources that I've used in this video and in the lesson today. Three of them are embedded in your slides and two of them are in your Google form. So I'm repeating the assignment for this week, which are due on 5/31, and both of them are all tasks. One of them is 7 points, and the other one is 8 points. Um, so one is based on the reading questions. So if you go to this Google form, this will show you this is what you're supposed to do. And embedded in the Google form is the link here that will take you to the reading assignment that will help you answer the questions that are associated with this form. And the second one is the Google form here. This is an exit card associated with the biogeochemical cycles. And when you're doing this, there is an interactive infographic that will help you to complete the Google form. In this interactive, the word that you see, the icons here, you can click on those. That will take you to the video, and the ones that are just there but don't have the icon either will have some image or will have a reading paragraph that will help you or walk you through the process of the carbon cycle. So complete both the forms and submit them by Sunday. As you all know, go to the Google Classroom and email me if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you for watching my video, and please let me know if any questions or concerns. Thank you.